So originally I had thought that this video would be sort of, my top 10 games of 2022. Until I realized I'd only played 9 new games this year. Everything else was either replays or I just wasn't playing anything at any given time. So instead I thought I would maybe appreciate some other forms of media that I don't talk about as much on this channel. That being, of course, movies and TV shows. But then I ran into the issue of there were too many good movies and shows that I had seen in order to make this just a top 10 list. So what we're doing today is we are doing the top 15 video games, movies, and TV shows of 2022. And just before we get started with everything, I do want to note that there are going to be a few omissions from this list. These are things that are on my radar, but I just haven't really gotten around to as of yet. The primary entries on that list would be Heartstopper, Top Gun Maverick, and the Crisis Core remake. This was supposed to be number 10 on the games I played this year, but as you can tell, it's still in the cellophane wrapper. So, because I haven't had a chance to play it, I can't put it on the list. All right, so kicking things off at number 15 is a show that I did not expect to like. When I first saw the trailer, I thought, this is aimed at a bit of a younger audience, and I'm just not the target demographic for it. So, there's no way I'm going to actively enjoy this, right? And somehow, I was pleasantly surprised. The show Miss Marvel was a fantastic treat this year. While some might write the show off for its Disney Channel aesthetic, there's so much about this show that just makes it work a lot better than some of the other Marvel shows. I think part of it has to do with just the way the character of Kamala Khan is portrayed. Overall, I think she's a fairly relatable hero, especially to anyone who might have had strict parents growing up. And also, the actors that play her parents do a phenomenal job. They play the role so well. This show is definitely my favorite of all of the MCU shows produced this year. Moving on to the next entry in this list is another Disney Plus original that maybe is a little bit on the shorter side. That, of course, being Star Wars Tales of the Jedi. So it took me a while to get into the animated Star Wars shows because, Clone Wars has over 100 episodes. So I was always just intimidated by the length a little bit. But after taking some time this summer to finally just watch all of it, and now that I'm caught up, I thought, I'm gonna watch this show as it comes out. And I was actually pretty impressed with this. I watched the whole show in one sitting, and overall I thought it was pretty solid. I did enjoy the stuff with Ahsoka, but I think the stuff with Count Dooku is what really makes this show interesting. You sort of start to see a side of this character that you never really saw before. You sort of see why he did what he did, not in any way that would maybe excuse his actions, but gives a little bit more insight into a character who previously was maybe a little bit too much of a comic book villain at times, especially in the shows. Number 13 on this list is something that I definitely had a ton of fun with, that being Kirby and the Forgotten Land. This is a fantastic platformer. For me, Kirby is always sort of, my comfort food game. They're usually on the easier side when it comes to video games and tend to be fairly easy to pick up and play in small bursts. This game is no real exception to that. Outside of some of the later game content, it is a fairly easy game to play. Being previously only really a 2D platformer, it was really interesting to see this series transition into some more 3D gameplay, and I feel like it did it really well. Also, the new mouthful mode powers are a really interesting addition to the game, and something I did not expect from this game at all, but I am so glad it made it in the game because it created some really interesting puzzle solving that I think the game kind of needed. Number 12 on this list is yet another strange addition that I didn't expect to enjoy nearly as much as I did. So, for those of you who might be aware, video game movies do not have the best reputation when it comes to quality. That has been true ever since their inception in the 90s. However, that seems to be changing ever so slightly as the year goes on. The primary poster child for this would be Sonic the Hedgehog. And so, since Sonic 2 came out this year, I had to see it when it came out. Both movies are a case of where I shouldn't be enjoying it as much as I did. But there's just something about these movies that works. A huge part of it probably is Jim Carrey. He just brings so much energy to the role as Eggman that makes for such a hilarious performance to watch. Like, it is great. Also, I did not expect Idris Elba to be as good in Knuckles as he was. The biggest weak link of this movie is, of course, some of the scenes with just the human characters. Like, I just don't care about these characters all that much. I think, hell, I don't even know if I remember their names. I think the main guy's name is Tom. Number 11 is an entry in a series that I never thought I would have enjoyed as much as I did. So, I generally don't play that many online games. I mostly talk about single-player games on this channel. But there are a few online games that, from time to time, catch my attention. The one with the most pull for me is none other than Splatoon 3, the latest entry in Nintendo's only series that is primarily an online experience. There's just so much about this game to love. Besides being just a really competent team shooter, there is also a fantastic story mode that really has no place being as good or interesting as it is, given that it's just sort of a glorified tutorial for the game's mechanics. However, the general level design and unique challenges that this mode presents are just so good that they are worth going through. Number 10 on this list is definitely gonna be probably my most controversial placement on this list. Like, I can already hear people typing the comments out now, but I'm going to remain steadfast in my position. Number 10 is Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Yes, I know about the glitches, I know about the bugs, I know about some of the other aspects that make it rough around the edges, but at the end of the day, this is some of the most fun I've had playing a Pokemon game in a good while. This is a game where, despite running out of content with it, I keep coming back to just like play raids and see if I can max out my Pokemon more. On top of just the gameplay experience, the story of this game is surprisingly good, and those last couple hours after you've beaten all of the 3 routes is so amazing and so unexpected from this series that I was just blown away. Number 9 is a movie that, in all respects, is too over the top to really work, yet despite that, it does, and it's a really, really fascinating watch. That, of course, being the Telugu language epic RRR. This movie is completely unapologetic in how absurd a lot of its shots are and just how ridiculous the movie is in a way that is a absolute joy to watch. Centering around a highly, highly fictionalized account of the lives of 2 real Indian revolutionaries, this movie centers itself on the friendship between these 2 characters and the trials and tribulations that brings on. Despite its 3-hour runtime, this is a movie that keeps you engaged and on the edge of your seat the entire time, and I cannot recommend it enough. Number 8 is a piece of media that seems to be following the trend of sort of re-examining aspects of tropes and characters that we've come to love. This movie in particular goes to answer one extremely, extremely important question. Is Batman okay? Like, seriously, is this guy okay? The 2022 Matt Reeves film, The Batman, is possibly one of the best iterations of the Caped Crusader I have ever seen. On par, if not in some ways exceeding the quality of the Nolan trilogy. This Bruce Wayne is a very different character than the one we see in that trilogy or in the Tim Burton movies, which I absolutely love. This character is not the billionaire, playboy, philanthropist we've come to know and love. This character is dark and brooding and frankly fits the profile of someone who would dress up as a bat and beat up criminals in the dark of night. The core thrust that makes this movie interesting is that we see this character hell-bent on revenge and taking out the crime that claimed his parents' lives, and coming to realize that that's not what being a hero is. Being a hero has more. You have to inspire people. You have to be there for those that you are trying to save. Number 7 on this list actually follows a lot of the same themes that we literally just talked about. This movie underwent a major revision in its script and direction following the 2020 death of Chadwick Boseman. But in doing so, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever makes for a fantastic Marvel film that really explores some of the ideas of revenge and grief in a very intimate way. We see the characters left behind learning to process their grief and figure out how they move on without their hero. And of course, this isn't the first time this theme has been addressed in the Marvel Universe. Like, pretty much all of Phase 4 has been characters dealing with the grief of those that they lost. But there's something about this one that makes it far, far more poignant than some of the others. In many ways, it is a tribute to Boseman's career and legacy as an actor, as it is about the characters that it portrays. On top of that, this is probably one of the better villains the MCU has had. Similar to the first one, we have a villain who is a little bit more complex than what we usually get with our disposable one-off villains that these movies are kinda known for. And frankly, I'm here for it. Number 6 on this list is the embodiment of a trend that I have absolutely been loving for the past couple years and really hope keeps going. That, of course, being the retro-styled SRPG triangle strategy. I still don't like the name, but this game is too good for me to get stuck on that. Set in a continent with 3 nations that have, for the longest time, been at peace, we see that start to break down as a war breaks out between the 3 entities that thrusts the main character of Serenoa at the center of it. Taking control of Serenoa, the player is forced to make a bunch of different choices that affect the outcomes of the story, adding a ton of replayability and doing something that not many JRPGs do. And most of them fix you onto a set story path that you can't really change. Beyond that, the gameplay is really interesting and engaging, with tons of really interesting maps that keep you on your toes constantly and force you to adapt to the terrain and enemy formations of that particular chapter. I can say for certain that this is one of the best strategy games that I have played in a good while, and for a hot flash made me want to go back and replay the original Final Fantasy Tactics. Moving on to number 5 is a movie that I didn't quite expect to enjoy at all, or hell, even have the interest in going to see. But as it drew closer, I felt like I just had to go. That, of course, being Avatar: The Way of Water. The running joke for the longest time is that the first movie made a ton of money, but then left no real lasting cultural impact. And sure, it doesn't really have that many memes generated about it, or a whole lot in terms of merchandise that was sold, but it's still undeniable that the impact that the first movie had on the industry, especially in the VFX department. This was one of the first movies to really go all the way in with using motion capture and fully rendered environments. Because for those of you who don't remember, the early 2000s CG was maybe a little rough. This second movie continues in that trend of pioneering more unique technology. This time, focusing on the ability to create more realistic looking underwater shots, which make for a very gorgeous movie to look at, and also has a pretty decent story on top of it. While the last movie focused very much so on large macro conflicts, this movie focuses down on some of the individual characters involved. We see a much more personal story than we did in the previous one, and one that doesn't even focus that much on the leads from the previous film, instead focusing on their kids and how the next generation after that first movie's events come to deal with their current circumstances. Number 4 on this list is a show that I don't think myself or many others expected to get all that much buzz, but despite all odds, it did. After everyone lost their goddamn minds over season 8 of Game of Thrones, it seems that this franchise has in some ways redeemed itself with a brand new show that is capturing audiences like never before. House of the Dragon is one of the best shows I've seen this year. Not the best, but one of. It is such a great experience. I was never expecting to really ever come back to Westeros after the finale of Game of Thrones, because it didn't sound like there was gonna be much of a future for the series, at least in visual media, and we all know he's not gonna finish those books. So, like, yeah, I thought we were done. And yet, I am very glad to be wrong. It is such a good show. The performances by the actors is phenomenal. Props especially to Emma Darcy and Patty Constantine. Both of these people deserve awards for their performance in this show. It was really, really good. And in fact, it's a show that's enthralled me so much and made me so afraid of getting spoiled that I just bought the goddamn book. Like, look at this thing. How does a show bring you to read something like this? Like, I don't know. I'm really enjoying it though, so I don't regret my decision at all. Number 3 on this list is a movie that really should be getting a lot more love and attention than it currently is, because it is so good. Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, is a fantastic mystery that keeps you guessing the entire time through a very clever set of misdirects that just make for an edge-of-your-seat viewing experience. Rian Johnson is a fucking genius with this movie. You can tell that this type of storytelling is what he's made for, because the ability for him to make you think the story's going one way, but then have it immediately go another way is unmatched. And I was so pleasantly surprised with this movie. And frankly, I think I owe it to myself to go back and watch the first one, because I haven't actually done that. Number 2 is a case of where you don't quite know what you want or that you wanted something until it's directly in front of you. I think a lot of you might know what particular piece of media I'm talking about here.
What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
Andor is the Star Wars show that I and many other people didn't know we wanted, but we absolutely needed. This prequel to a prequel places us in one of the most unique positions in the Star Wars universe that we've ever seen. We are shown how exactly the rebellion truly began. And while we sort of saw that with Rebels, this show really goes in and just shows us what it took for the rebellion to truly happen. The sacrifices that were made, the people who were lost and never remembered, and the means by which the Empire tried everything in their power to stop it, but at the end of the day, could not put out the flames once they had been started. It is phenomenal, quite dark, and unlike any other Star Wars show we've ever seen. But it's the type of political thriller that this series really should have had from the onset. And finally, number 1. After all of the high praises I've sung for some of the last few entries on this list, what do I think exceeds all of those to be my favorite thing to be released in 2022? I think some of you might already know the answer, but for those of you who don't, here you go. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is one of the best games I have played this year and one of the best narrative experiences that I've consumed. This game was not the follow-up to the previous 2 games that I expected. The world of Ionios really brings us to start to ask some major questions about what it means to live, the importance of being able to move on and accept change when it happens. This is the central core that runs through this entire game and defines the lives of all of its characters, especially as you later find out for its villains. Like with the previous entry, we see characters who are willing to put everything on the line to fight for a sunrise that they might very well never see, but yet they do it anyways because they know that the way the world is isn't the way it's supposed to be. A fantastic, emotional narrative experience unmatched by many JRPGs in the genre, paired with some of the best gameplay the Xenoblade series has ever seen, and taking the technical capabilities of the Nintendo Switch to its limit to craft a gorgeous open world that in some cases you look at and be like, that's a Nintendo game. Like, no, that's a Nintendo game. There's just so much I could say about this game that I could keep us here all day. But I think with that, I'm going to probably just end things off here. I want to thank you guys so much for a fantastic 2022. I've got so many great things planned for this year that I cannot wait to share with you guys, and it'll be great. We'll have a great fucking year this next year. I just know it. But until the next point, I will see you guys